I started really at that point in 2010, really started wondering, why was it that I was having nightmares every night? Why was it that I would be responding to calls and having flashbacks? Why was it that I wasn't sleeping for weeks on end? Why was it that I was, going to booze or going to drugs or going to another really unhealthy coping skill and realizing that it was an unhealthy coping skill, but still doing it anyway because it either numbed the pain
Yep.
or it didn't allow me to feel anything.
Mhm. Hey everyone, this is Christina and Daniel Duffenbaugh with 1042 Project, and welcome to episode 9 of the Shared Voices podcast. And today we have our great friend Keith Hanks with us, and I'm going to let him share who he is and what he does with you guys. We're very excited for you to hear about him.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
So, like
absolutely.
Yeah.
like Christina said, my name is Keith Hanks. I was a firefighter and EMT out here in Massachusetts. I live in New Hampshire now, but I was a firefighter and EMT in Massachusetts for 21 years. I worked both municipal and private-based EMS along with municipal fire. I worked as a training officer, worked at the fire academy. I was pretty heavily involved in like education and training throughout most of my career. Um, and over the years, it became apparent that both personal and professional stuff had kind of built up, and I was starting to have issues. I was having work performance issues and whatnot long before I had other issues. But in 2015, I got diagnosed with what would eventually be called complex PTSD, and eventually I retired from the job on medical due to my PTSD in 2017. And because of the way my career sort of went, and because of sort of how I was, let out that door at the end of my career, so to speak, um, I sort of became an advocate for, speaking out about mental health and talking about being okay, not be okay all the time, as long as you don't stay there.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And because I felt like no one had to go through the experience I did with my career, just because, what had happened to them disrupted their life or their career. So what started as just kind of advocating on social media kind of blossomed into a whole plethora of things that I currently do, which range from writing articles for a couple different magazines. I'm currently in the editing process of writing my book. Um, I run a podcast as well. I've done a few documentaries. Just I do public speaking. I go around the country and speak and different things like that, and it's sort of become like a second calling for me, and it's kind of given me back a purpose without that purpose being the badge.
Yeah.
So that's kind of me in a nutshell. Very abridged, obviously, but that's sort of
Yeah.
who I am.
Yeah. And thank you for that, Keith. And so we first met Keith. I first met him at a conference back in 2022 in
Mm,
Chicago. He was a guest speaker. He's a national speaker and author, like you said. And he was giving a talk at the conference. That's the first time I got to meet him. And I could tell right away that this man had a burning inside of him and a passion to help smash the stigma attached to PTSD, PTS, whatever you want to call it. And I could tell right away he was a stigma fighter. And him and I got to talking, and we developed a friendship over time. And we also got to record with you when you were out in Boston, and we had a lot of
mm,
fun doing that. And
mm,
so I just thank you. You've been, you're just one that's helped blaze the trail for me when I first got this calling on my life to start getting into becoming an advocate for mental health for first responders. I didn't feel number one, I wasn't sure I was going to be accepted back
mm,
into back into the first responder field. I felt like I was rejected and kind of kicked out when I went out on medical in 2014. So honestly, Keith, I was afraid to go to that first conference, and I just
mm.
want to say to you, thank you for being that face. A lot of people don't know he's a big, big man. He's like 6'5", 220, 250, depending on the day. He's a big guy, and he was one of the nicest guys I met there. Was him and Michael Segru, and I just want to thank you for just being so kind to me because I was so nervous walking in those doors for the first time. Trying to get back into this field, and guys like you paved the way and made it comfortable for for me and for my wife to get into this field. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And I want to share with you, you definitely made an impact on Daniel because I remember him coming back from that conference and I remember hearing about you. He was very excited to
I'm
share.
blushing. I'm blushing.
You should look at it.
He was fanboying over you back then. No.
I
Nice.
was. I didn't know. I didn't know how I was going to be accepted, and
Yeah.
for him and Michael to both sit down with me and talk to me, and they gave me their cell phone numbers and basically anything you need,
Yeah.
reach
That meant a
out.
lot to you.
And you didn't just say it; you walked it out. So
Mm.
thank you.
There needs to be more of it, and that's one of the things I always try to do. I've always tried to, even when I was on the job. I've always tried to be someone who, if you're gonna say something, if you're gonna talk the talk, you gotta walk the walk, right? And
Mhm.
even more so with this part of the job, with the stigma and trying to convey that it's okay to reach out for help. You really have to walk that walk. You can't just billboard yourself and look good on the exterior. You really have to be what you say you are. And unfortunately, you meet people, even in this part of the field, who aren't who they say they are. And so I try to personify that. And people like Mike Segura do the same thing, and others. And you gravitate towards each other, and that's important with what we're all trying to do, is being true to the cause.
That's what I
I
loved about
agree.
it. As we traveled around, we met different types of people, and we know that there is a large amount of the community that truly want to work together. That's not competing
Yep.
with each other. There's nobody out here trying to one up the other. Everyone's truly helping each other because it's going to take all of us to be willing to work together to make anything
Takes a
happen.
village, man. Absolutely takes a village.
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly.
And to tell some of us older guys and gals who've been around a while and have since left, we need to be a voice for the ones that are still working who can't speak up for themselves. And that's what I love about you and Michael Segru and some of the other people I met is just the genuine heart and how much you care for our first responders. I feel like there's sometimes, I guess the best way I can put it is there's a lot of fake help out there
Hmm.
where it's just they get a lot of big government grants and they just say they're helping just to say they're helping to get the grant money. That may be, I don't know their true heart or true intention, so I shouldn't speak for that. But I have noticed a huge difference between people who are pure about their help and their intent and the ones who are doing it for the wrong. And I know through traveling around, we've met some people who truly care about our listeners, and you are definitely one of those.
Hmm.
And
I
honestly,
appreciate that.
Keith, had you and Michael Segru not treated me that way in Chicago, it would have, I don't know if it would have derailed our organization, but it definitely would have set us back because taking that leap of faith to get in the car and drive over to Chicago, it took everything in me.
I bet.
Um, and so yeah, I know I keep trying to make you blush here, but you mean a lot to me, and I
Yeah,
just
my,
want you to
my
know
fair
that.
Irish skin, man, it doesn't take much. So
Yeah, you're gonna go out in that snow and stand out real big time.
just
Because
my cheeks, though.
yeah, how many inches you guys got there? Have you had them last week?
I don't. A lot's melted today because it was about 40 degrees. But
Ooh.
last night when it was done snowing, there was about 40 on the ground.
40 inches. You're talking 40 inches. That's,
That's
40 inches.
terrible.
and we
You
live in
couldn't see
Iowa.
my
We
snowball.
yeah, we live in Iowa. We get snow, but we don't get 40 inches of snow.
Yeah, it's all about the elevation, man. It's flat as a fart in Iowa.
It's true. So
I'm at.
Keith, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm at about 2,000 feet right here. So it's we get quite a bit of snow. Unfortunately, it's
we go here. We're above corn level, so we're about if you're standing up, depending on the time of year, we're about 2 feet above corn level.
amazing.
Amazing.
I just made that up on the fly right now. Here we go.
Yeah. Not surprised. But one of the things that we want to do with this podcast is allow you a chance to tell your story and highlight the hope in your story. I love your story, and you do a great job of being honest and authentic about the things that you went through and struggled with and how you overcame it and what your life is like now. And so if there's again, I know this is super abridged, but if there's a few things that off the top of your head are really impactful that you would want to share with people, because a lot of our listeners we know haven't spoken to anybody yet about the things that they're struggling with. I know one of the things that you'd mentioned before was the anger issues that you thought that was a you thing. Can you just talk a little bit more about that or some of the other things that you worked through.
Yeah, and to expound on that just a little bit further is, yeah, and like when in your career it kind of all started, and when when you finally noticed it and got the courage to reach out, and kind of what that looked like or didn't look like.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's important too. Anger was always a thing for me. It was the way I was brought up. Anger was allowed, sadness wasn't. We weren't allowed to show fear, so anger, um, as a male, was pushed. And in the fire service, especially in my family, where as many people know who've heard my story, I mean, I got a firefighting tradition going back to 1875. There's been at least a member of my family on the job in every generation, and so it was just like branded into the fabric that you had to be a certain way. And a lot of my trauma comes before I even got on the job. I have childhood trauma, and it was all blanked out, right? And so when I got on the job at 18, still in high school, I was sort of very naive, obviously, 18 years old, right? It's the mid 90s. And, we didn't have social media and stuff to occupy our time. We actually had to do things. But I didn't know who I was, and uh, my story goes that my first night that I got pinned, I got my badge, I got sworn in. I had my first official department training, and I had my first fire. And I was on the first line in that building. And that was a pivotal moment in my life, for several reasons. I finally was accepted by those around me. I finally felt as though I accomplished something on my own. And I was regaled as a hero that night. And all of that culminated into an identity that I held on to for 21 years. And, it's an aggressive job. It's, most jobs in the first responder world, the military, typically are. And because I already had issues, the job, me being a black cloud being someone who goes to all the bad calls. If something's going to happen on shift or on when they go to a call, it's going to be me. And, shit started piling up. And you take a male who has pre-job trauma, put him through thousands of calls, 800 to 1,000 traumas in a career, and all of that anger gets magnified. And so, I go through my career, and it's always there. People notice it. I was always referred to as the asshole. Um, Not just an asshole. I was usually the asshole.
The
The asshole. Not approachable for mundane things, but I was the go-to guy for training. I was the go-to guy if you needed shit done. I was the first one in the door, last one out of the door. But I was a miserable person. I was angry, and it was destroying my life, relationships, health, kids, family, and all that. And it became increasingly apparent in 2010. So we're talking at this point 14 years into my career. And, pretty much at that point, I started showing a lot of more outward signs. It was a lot more than just anger. There started being more suicide attempts. I started having more inpatient stays. That at that time we didn't have a lot of culturally competent therapists in treatment centers, or we didn't know of them. And that was sort of like a very pivotal point when it comes to PTSD symptoms, and me realizing that there was more than just me being an a-hole.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
really started feeling like, oh, maybe all these bad things that have happened are actually kind of messing with me. And I started really at that point in 2010, really started wondering, why was it that I was having nightmares every night? Why was it that I would be responding to calls, and having flashbacks? Why was it that I wasn't sleeping for weeks on end? Why was it that I was, going to booze or going to drugs or going to another really unhealthy coping skill, and realizing that it was an unhealthy coping skill, but still doing it anyway because it either numbed the pain
Yep.
or it didn't allow me to feel anything,
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
and back then we weren't talking about it, and as a man, um, it was even more um, taboo to be like, wow, I'm really sad inside. I'm not actually angry. I'm really sad, and I would really like a hug from someone. You know,
Yeah.
I couldn't you couldn't say that. And being
Yeah.
6'5", like Daniel said, um, most people looked at me and were like, "Don't f with that guy," or "He's the guy to take the door." You know,
Yep.
and
Yep.
so hugs were out for Hanks, and it
No
was
hugs for Hanks.
no hugs for Hanks.
He's a hugless Hanks.
That hugs, that'll be my campaign slogan when I run for Senate, right? Hugs for Hanks, or hugs from Hanks.
There you go.
There you go.
But yeah, 2010 was a big deal. I ended up, getting kicked out of my house. Had bought a big house with my two older kids and my mother and stepfather. Got kicked out of there. Lost custody of my kids. Everything downward spiral. My career started taking hits. I started getting denied for promotional exams. I got removed from the training department. And it just collapsed, and everybody just was like, oh, well, he's just an a-hole.
Mm.
Right.
And so I kind of fell off to the wayside, and all I really wanted to do was just tell people that I hurt, and
Right.
that this job and the effects that my personal life was taken from the job, and how the stuff that I had been through in my personal life was affecting the job. It was all tied in, and I just wanted to tell someone, but I couldn't, and it wasn't till years later that I was able to do that. And by that point, my career was destroyed, and I was bitter towards all of it, and most of the people I had spent decades working with.
Yeah.
You know,
Kind of similar to my story. I mean, it just kind of once it just kind of all goes downhill in a hurry, and it snowballs in a hurry when it starts to go down before you eventually lose everything, which is what it
And
was.
with both of you, it took years. I know for you, it took years. And for you, Keith, 14 years before you said that you started like reflecting, like, why am I having these nightmares? Why am I having
right?
these flashbacks? So I think that speaks to like hindsight's 2020, right? We can look back now and see how it all fits together. But when you're in the middle of it, sometimes it doesn't always make immediate sense. And I think you did touch on it, but I did want to just directly ask, did any of your coworkers, friends, family look at what was going on and just ask you directly, like, hey, man, are you okay?
There was not in those words.
Okay.
Not
Yeah.
for sure. Not in those words. There was definitely a family member or two who would refer to it as me being nuts. Maybe I had to get go see a shrink.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when something is said derogatory to you on a
Yeah.
subject that isn't talked about, and you're already questioning whether that's really the problem, when someone's like, "Oh, go get help," you're crazy. You're scaring everyone around you. What are you going to do? You're not going to do it,
Right.
Right.
especially as a type A male. You're just not going to do it. And so that actually hindered a lot of things because no one knew
Yeah.
how to ask. And these days, I can look back, I can reflect now, it being 2023, and that being 13 years ago, that people didn't know. We didn't know how
Yeah.
to talk about this. We didn't know how to ask our brothers or our sisters in the job, hey, what's really going on? Like, we didn't know because it was so taboo.
Right. So on that note, say somebody's listening and there's a first responder in their life that this sounds very similar. Maybe they also don't know how to ask. What would you recommend? What's the best way to approach that?
I think the biggest thing is trying not to fix that person. And
Mm.
as first responders, we often fall short when it comes to like the peer support models.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of them are kind of geared towards trying to solve someone's problems, and in the end, you're not meant to solve someone's problems. I had to fix my own shit,
Yeah.
and I just wanted support, and I needed support from those around me. So the advice I always tell people is, if you actually care enough to get involved with someone who looks like they're struggling, you got to be genuine. You got to be curious. You got to want to listen to them, and you got to be accepting of what they tell you, and not allow your own discomfort to guide that conversation or that relationship, because your discomfort is going to be the first thing that comes up, and it's like, oh, this person's talking about ending their life, I got to fix that. Or this person's talking about how they have nightmares every night, and that's awful to hear. I don't want to hear that. So I'm going to guide that you can't do that. And you have to support those people, and you have to genuinely want to help. And I think we all, because we're helpers, right?
Yeah.
We want to fix that. We're instant gratification people as first responders. We put the wet stuff on the red stuff. You blue canaries do what you guys do, and it's it is what it is. But we're instant gratification. We have to fix things. We're fixers.
Yes.
We go out. We resolve issues in a matter of minutes, and we move on to the next problem. And that can't be necessarily the way that things need to happen with mental health. You have to
Yeah.
care, you have to support, and you have to be real and compassionate about it.
I think a lot of the first responders, as far as first responders talking to each other, a lot of it's just a lot of them I don't think know what to say because they're afraid that sometimes society scares us into saying stuff because they talk so much about what not to say to somebody, Whereas I feel like people are afraid to even help each other anymore. I know we know a first responder here in the States that had a coworker, his partner in his patrol car, look at him and say, "Hey, I think I'm gonna go take my own life today." And the guy didn't say anything, and the first responder went home and did exactly what he said he was gonna do. And that's heavy weight to carry. And I think a lot of it is we're just afraid when someone speaks up. We're afraid to like he said, listen to the hard stuff and listen to understand, not listen to fix. And I know I struggled with that, Keith, when I was a first responder. I wasn't the best coworker either. When other fellow coworkers were hurting, I think I ignored it just as much as everybody else did. It's one
Same
thing I
here.
wish I could take back from my career. I wish I would have been the loud, squeaky wheel in the room that just talked about mental health and talked about mine, but I didn't. I can look back now and wish, but I do think a lot of our first responders are just afraid to say anything. And I would just say to that is just listen. You don't need to say anything. I don't know what your thoughts, Keith.
I always tell people this, and I talk about it with my wife Adele quite a bit. Sometimes when I'm talking about what's going on, like even today, I still battle with my mental health. I have a lot of different things going on, and I still to this day, I don't want anyone to think that I started seeking help and now I'm right as rain.
Right, I hear you.
That's not how this works.
No,
But
sir.
it's when you're going through the motions, when you're having a tough time. Sometimes, in my case, it's almost all the time, I just want someone to sit in the suck with me. I just
Yeah.
want someone to validate what I'm feeling, because something. And a lot of first responders probably appreciate it. I've been through a lot in my life, not just on the job, and sometimes I just want to say that it has really sucked.
Mm-hmm.
It has really sucked, and I don't need someone to be like, "Wow, that's making me uncomfortable. How about those Red Sox?"
Right.
Yeah.
Or, "Oh, you'll get through this, man. Something, maybe right this minute I don't feel like I will."
Yeah.
And it's a human reaction thing, and no one wants to be uncomfortable. Unless you've been through certain training that you're trained to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yep.
It's one of those things where when you start to feel uncomfortable, especially with mental anguish and different another human suffering, you want to fix it,
Yep.
and that's good. But with mental health, it's not a cut on an arm. You can't just wrap a Band-Aid around it and the bleeding stops. Sometimes they have to let some of this bleed out of them
Yep.
in order to feel better, because it's like a poison sometimes. Sometimes having it and keeping it inside you is more damaging than letting it out. It's like that. There's a meme going around about a person holding onto a rope, and it's actually doing more damage by holding onto it. And if you let go, you can actually start to heal.
Yep.
It's a
Saw that.
similar analogy. And letting this shit out is really how you heal. And being a supportive person when someone's doing that is really how you really help someone.
Yeah, I like that point. I think that there's definitely something to be said for just simply being with a person in the low places, like you said, just so it doesn't make it suck less, like you said, but then you're not alone there anymore. Like Daniel and I have had a conversation many times about the look that people get on their face the first time that they realize that somebody else's story lines up a lot with theirs, and they feel that connection, like, oh, I'm not alone in it. And I think that there's just a lot of hope comes along with that doesn't make it better, but that means you're not alone.
Right. That's key. is
Yeah.
knowing that you're not alone. Because that's the funny thing about mental health is, and I think people start to forget that, it's 2023 and we still only know what 10% of the brain does.
Right.
10%.
Yep.
That's crazy. And think about what we do know.
Yeah.
And think about what the other 90% may be capable of. And so many people out there are so quick to hop on the, oh, that can't be what's happening. I say, well, how do you know? There's a 90% chance it is. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
it's there is when you get this stuff out, there is a sense of, and that's really the first stages of healing is owning your shit and getting it out of you. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, when I started talking about it initially with like a therapy and with other closer people to me, that's when I really started to heal. That was the initial stages of healing, was letting it out and talking about it, being honest.
What other types of treatments and stuff have you tried, Keith? Since you were diagnosed with PTSD, and like you said, there's no pill you can take to erase this from us. I wish there was the Men in Black pen that we could all use to erase
Oh
our
yeah.
memories, but that doesn't exist. So, what are some of the tools? I mean, I know a lot of our first responders are. Some of them are like I was early on, where they don't even want to leave their house. They're so built up with guilt and shame, and what's that? What did that look like for you? Because I know some of that stuff you did had to be a little scary. I could imagine. You said you went to treatment. I believe you went to inpatient, and some of that stuff had to be scary. Can you walk us through some of that and how you got the courage to pull yourself up and do that? Because a lot of people don't have that courage, and that was me a couple years ago.
Yeah, initially in the beginning, like I said, I was getting a lot of like I always refer to people who aren't first responders as general pop or
Yeah,
normies.
yep,
Mm-hmm.
People
civilians.
who do the right thing and run away from danger and stress, right? Um, um, so I was dealing with a lot of therapists and inpatient facilities that weren't really equipped or trained to deal with someone who has 400 times the amount of traumas that the average person does. And I'll be honest, initially my job was never taken into the equation.
Really?
They never asked about my job. They were like, oh well, that must be kind of stressful. Yep. And then
Wow,
never went any
Wow.
wow.
further than that. It
I'm
was
so
weird.
surprised.
Now, we're talking years ago. We're talking,
Oh yeah,
starting
Yeah.
probably 15 years ago.
yep,
Um, there's a lot of modalities, right? And there's all the different acronyms for all the different types of therapy, CBT, DBT, and all this other cognitive and what the other one is. There's other forms. Basically, there's talk therapy, which I've done. There's group therapy, which I've done. For a while, because I was convinced because of the drinking and drugging I was doing, I thought I had an addiction issue, which I don't. I just have an abuse issue. And so I tried AA, and AA is actually a very great network. Um, it's all based around support, right? And it's all based around similarities and stories and not necessarily comparing. And I find I actually recommend AA to a lot of people, even people who aren't necessarily, you know, full tilt alcoholics or addicts.
absolutely.
You find some great support in AA. So I've done that. And then the biggest thing that's really in the last, since like 2015, that's really starting to come to light, this is because of the veterans, are like retreats, right?
Mm.
Yep,
So non-hospital based getaways in a way where they'll have therapy. Well, they'll do yoga, they'll do massage, they'll do Reiki, they'll do meditation, they'll do acupuncture, they'll do more holistic stuff. And you'd be surprised how much these things actually help.
yeah,
And over the years there's been pharmaceuticals that a lot. And because one of the things that I've come to terms with recently is owning the fact that I wasn't always honest with a lot of my therapy and a
yeah.
lot of the things I wouldn't share. If you didn't ask me, I wouldn't tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
so when they weren't taking my job into consideration or weren't asking the right questions, I wasn't supplying them with the right answers. So they were like, oh well, you must be this, so here's a whole boatload of drugs.
Mm.
And that was when you're not a certain thing and you be given drugs that are for a certain thing. You know what happens? You become a zombie.
Mm.
And so all the emotions get melted out of you. So another part of this too is being honest when you're getting therapy. So meditation is these days is really my thing. Meditation and and I still use therapy. Really, what I bank on in the end, you can talk about this stuff. You can hash it out a million ways from here till today. In the end, you really have to learn how to kind of deal with the emotional power of what you've been through, no matter what it is, personal, bad, fight with you, whatever it might be. You have to deal with the emotional power, but you have to learn to live in the now too. Once you get
Mhm.
through and deal with what you have been through, the key to not continue to build traumas the rest of your life is to live in the now. And that's the practice. You don't have to sit there like Gandhi with your legs crossed all the time. I can't physically do that. So I just sit in the moment.
That would look funny.
I got long legs. It's hard to wrap them into a pretzel. You know what I mean? So it's all about being in the now and just enjoying and being grateful for what is around you. And it sounds corny. It sounds like, oh, here I got this guy's born again. Here we go again. And it's not that. It's simply we are so overstimulated as first responders. We're always waiting for
Yes.
the other shoe to drop.
Yes.
And whether you're on duty or not, you're always waiting. And that's why so many of us work 80 to 100 hours a week or have numerous jobs. Or if you're on the fire or EMS side, you have your full-time gig and then you're an on-call member somewhere else because you can never not be on duty.
Yep.
And when you get to the point in life that I got to where God then tells you, hey, you know something? You've done enough. You've paid your debt. Here's an opportunity to not have to be on duty all the time. You take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
You sit in the now. And so my biggest thing these days is mindfulness, therapy, and meditation. And that's really how I process life and
Mhm.
all the shit that it throws at can still throws at me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I have to do that every day. You know, Keith, I'm the same way. I have to, it's how I start my day. I get up and I read my Bible and I do my meditation and my prayers and
Yep.
I get myself to the now because it's so easy to worry about tomorrow and regret yesterday. And that's what the trouble I've had is letting my past go.
Yep.
I put myself in a lot of bad situations. I caused myself a lot of harm to not just me, but to my family. And a lot of times, Keith, I get stuck living in the past and that beats me down. And so I'm working on that currently to try to live in the now, to not worry about the future, not be, you
Mhm.
know, beat myself up for the past. And there's so much about what you just said. And the value of starting every day like that has been so important to me.
Yeah, I definitely want to comment on the meditation piece because you kind of mentioned it. Some people kind of scoff at it, but I just want to make a point. So I've meditated myself, and so it truly does make a difference. Like I would really recommend that if you've never tried meditation, please just give it a try. And I've also gotten to see the difference it's made for Daniel because this has been something that he just like really, I would say legitimately tried, I guess, fairly recently. And I saw the difference that it made in him. And then how he was able to use it in other stressful situations to, like, I don't know, how would you describe it? Come back down again, I guess. Like,
Yeah, to
um,
get back to reality.
yeah,
My brain can take me down a dark hole. It's
yeah,
like a spiral
Oh
of
yeah,
yeah,
doubt
man.
and shame and guilt. And I
yep,
can get to that and having that time reminds me of how God sees me
yeah,
and who I really am and that my past is nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, it's what's going to drive me for the future
mm-hmm.
to help others. And yeah, I struggle with that, but just meditation to me, even not very long ago, was a voodoo word. Because there's this image that comes in your mind when people say
Meditation.
meditation, and it's you
Like
know,
the legs crossed, like you said,
yeah,
with like, your hands up like
I'm
this.
gonna tell you
right,
That
something. My I got introduced, and this is gonna smash all those scoffs that people make at meditation. I got introduced to meditation by someone who is one of my best friends now, a man by the name of Steve. Steve, who I met and began doing different conferences with in the New England area and stuff, is a three-tour Marine and
cool.
has been to Kabul, Ramadi, and Afghanistan, some of the worst and bloodiest fighting that has been done in the Middle East. The man has actually taken lives, and he is the one who taught me how to meditate. and he swears by it. And I always, when people hear, when I tell my story and I'm like, yeah, I meditate, and they're like, you meditate? And I'm like, you want to know who taught me how to meditate? And Steve's not a very big guy. I mean, no one's really big compared to me, and that's kind of a whatever. But and he's not a small guy. And yes, a three-tool Marine who is now a firefighter medic and one of my best friends taught me how to meditate and swears by it. And he is one of the most approachable people these days that I know. And it can really balance your life out. And it's not, I think there is a lot of misnomers when it comes to meditation. People think that you got to wear like an orange robe and never again eat meat and wear sandals in the winter and whatever it is. And
Vote a
it
certain
isn't.
way.
Yeah, and it
Right.
has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with your time and looking
Mhm.
at yourself and your peace. And we all deserve to have that peace, man. And I think so many of us first responders, and even our families, specifically our spouses, just we don't think we deserve that peace. We think
Yep.
that we always have to be go 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 go, even when the job is long gone. We always feel like we have to be doing something. We have to be stressed. We have to be activated all the
Mm.
time. And we don't. We earn peace. We deserve to have that 5, 10, 45 minutes, whatever it is, whatever it looks like for you. We deserve that. And that is how you have longevity. That is how you continue to work through life, is by finding yourself peace.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in for this episode. We're going to go ahead and stop right here. And we're going to just jump back in next week with episode 10 with the rest of Keith's story. Next week, we're going to be jumping into identity and the identity that first responders have and what can happen when we lose it. And I'm excited for you guys to hear what Keith has to say because I know I've experienced that myself. So thank you for tuning in to episode 9. And we'll see you guys next week with Keith Hanks for part 2.